Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to the first in Shriver's Spotlight on the Foster System series. This first webinar is called Moving from Why to How, Parent Leaders' Perspectives on the Movement for Child Welfare Justice. My name is Tanya Gassenheimer. I am an attorney at the Shriver Center where we seek economic and racial justice through policy work. I am on the community justice team where I focus on the foster system. We also work around the criminal legal system with the common approach to both of decarceration, keeping individuals and families together in their communities and out of these systems. An overview of today's program, we're all here to talk about and think through how we create the conditions in which families and communities thrive. I will start us off with some introduction and context setting about the system and why it's so critical that parents impacted by the system be centered and be the ones leading us forward. We will then hear from a panelist of experts about how we might get to this goal. And then at the end, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A, and then we will make some announcements. And so today, where we are and the system we have. The system itself will often frame its role as neutral, unbiased, working for the common good, and as a helping mechanism. And this is not to assume negative intent. Those who work within the system may genuinely believe this to be true, that the system is neutral. And if one ascribes to this framing, little needs to change. However, another framing that family advocates subscribe to, including ourselves included, is that this is a parallel and extension of the criminal legal system, which I'll speak to a little more in a moment. Both systems we view as surveilling, regulating, separating, and punishing, particularly Black and Indigenous parents, families, and communities, and those experiencing poverty. We also see this as intentional, systemic, in how this system was set up and has existed through history. And if one ascribes to this framing, there is dire need for significant substantive change through an intersectional lens and approach. And one of the largest indictments on the system and one of the largest harms is the racial disproportionality. Nationally in the US population, for example, the population is 12% Black, but 20% of the foster system makeup is Black. And we're talking about, as of 2017, 7.5 million children referred into this system, which is about 1 in 10 US children. And then there's a link that'll be dropped in the chat right now. You all can look at your individual state, that's some state-by-state information. And then many of us on this webinar are coming from Illinois, and those stats are even more stark. In Cook County, where Chicago is located, the general population is 24% Black, but the foster population is a staggering 70% Black. And then for Illinois statewide, it's 14 and 44%. And then according to the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform, between fiscal years 2018 and 20, the number of Illinois children removed annually jumped an enormous 30%, with the 2019 increase being the second highest in the country. And while nationwide, the number of children being removed is reaching a 21-year low, it's quite the opposite in Illinois and scarily reaching a 21-year high. And as I mentioned, the parallels of these two systems, the criminal legal and foster system, they both involve surveillance, one by law enforcement, one by CPS and mandated reporters. There's an allegation of either criminal activity or abuse and neglect, which has a heavy consequence tied to it, the removal of individual liberty or the potential removal of a person's child. And then the state decides whether or not to prosecute this case against a person. Both cases can be settled by plea or stipulation, which involve heavily disparate power dynamics, unequal power dynamics. And after the cases are technically over, there are still permanent consequences and punishment on individuals and families through registries, which can impact housing, employment, and every aspect of a person's and family's life. And this is the current iteration of a troubling and devastating history in this country of family separation, which is why those who ascribe to this view see this as intentional in the setup of our institutions. This dates all the way back to chattel slavery, in which we know family separation was often a cruel condition of bondage. This continued with orphan trains, which was the origin point for much of the system we have today, in which children were sent on literal trains, often referred by juvenile court or other institutions, to be raised by other families. More than 40% of these families had living parents who were deemed unfit due to poverty, immigration status, things like that. And that reflects a running theme throughout this history of a systemic judgment, value judgment of who is fit and deserving to be parents and who is not. And it's often very racialized. Then we had Indian boarding schools, which was a project of colonizers who wanted to destroy indigenous culture. And families were coerced into having their children taken off of reservations, sent to these boarding schools where they were required to learn and conform to white dominant culture. Then in the 1950s, we had the Indian Adoption Project, which was a government project as a response to poverty on reservations. And it sought to remove indigenous youth from their families, specifically to place them with non-indigenous families, again, making that value judgment of who is capable of parenting. Then we get into the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Many of us know about the war on drugs rhetoric and the legal scheme that was set up, intentionally racialized, to devastate Black communities and separate folks from their communities. This history continues through today. We have the Indian Child Welfare Act from 1978, which included some legal protections against removing indigenous children from their families. But even despite these minimal protections, indigenous youth as in 2015 were overrepresented by 2.7 times of their makeup in the general population. And then in the 2000s to today, much of the legal scheme from the war on drugs remains in effect. And we all know what's been happening recently at the US-Mexico border with the zero tolerance policy and ICE's practices, again, making this systemic value judgment of predominantly Black and brown parents as not being deserving or able to parent their children. And we see today's system as the continuation and the current iteration of this long and very troubling history. And with that, I'm going to pass it off and introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our panelists, and they will get into a very rich discussion that I hope y'all are excited about. I know I am, about how we move forward, how we affect change around this problematic system. So our wonderful moderator is Elena, AKA Nina Thompson. Her stated mission in life is to assist families with support and education needed to protect them from child welfare barriers and family separation, focusing particularly on keeping children with their parents. She has founded 2 organizations, Nina's Arc and 7 Delights, through which she provides services, supplies, home-cooked meals, and hair care and other things to her community. She advocates especially in the West Side, representing the West Side, and has a deep commitment to supporting victims and survivors of domestic violence, those unjustly penalized by the child support system, and those whose lives have been impeded by incarceration. And she also is a volunteer organizer with the West Side Health Authority. And with that, I pass it over to you. Take us away, Nina.
Hey, thank you guys. I'm gonna start with introducing one of our wonderful panelists, Joyce McMillan. Her mission: to remove systematic barriers in communities of color by bringing awareness to the racial disparities in systems where people of color are disproportionately affected. She is the founder of JMacForFamilies and Parent Legislative Action Network, leads child welfare advocacy at Sinergia Incorporation, member of a West Harlem Democrats NYC County Committee, Advisory Committee of Center for NYC Affairs at the new school. She also is a board member for Families Together NYS, Women's Prison Association, WPA, Movement for Family Power. She's a co-chairman for West 134th Community Association. She has testified for City Council at City Hall, made many media appearances, and frequently lectures at institutions, including Columbia University, NYU, CUNY Law, Connell U, Harlem Hospital, and others. Our next panelist will be Suzanne Sellers. This extraordinary leader, head of Families Organizing for Child Welfare Justice, whose mission is to advocate for family unification and systematic change. Longtime child welfare reform advocate, public policy expert, and sought after speaker and presenter. She has done grassroots advocacy at state and federal levels, spoken nationally on the need for child welfare reform, guest lectured at a college, and provided expertise on several national and regional working groups and committees. She has been featured in many print, televised, and radio publications and programs, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning NYT OPED, A Woman's Rights, Part 4, Slandering the Unborn, MBA from DePaul, Master of Public Policy from U of Chicago, and MA in Technology Studies from Trinity, INTL-IU. Lastly, I want to introduce Tony Lawlor, extraordinary parent leader. His mission is mentoring and helping young people overcome barriers that prevent them from reaching their full potential. He is the CEO of Lawlor Consulting, which supports many nonprofits, co-founder and board member of Revitalize Black Chicago, Family Justice Resource Center, which advocates against wrongful abuse allegations by DCFS, and INTL Parent Advocacy Network, where he is working on training and program. He has a bachelor's from U of I, master's in evangelism and leadership from Wheaton Certified Advancing Youth Development Trainer, member of American Evaluation Association, junior board member for True Mentors. He has led many city and state initiatives for youth in foster care, including through DCFS Statewide Youth Advisory Board. He is the author of You Can Make It Too in 2017. His favorite quote is, "Life is 10% of what happens and 90% of how you react to it." Welcome all panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm ready, guys. Okay, so I have these questions I'm asking everyone. Our first question will be, what are some of the problems with how the system operates now? How do you propose those problems be addressed?
I'll start. Hello, everyone. Suzanne Sellers, Families Organizing for Child Welfare Justice. One of the major problems of the system, in my mind, is that justice for families and safety for children is not connected to families remaining together. When it is safe, families ought to remain together. Another major difficulty in the system is the accountability of child welfare agencies. Child welfare agencies are not being held accountable, are not being held to their own stated missions and standards. And this includes the point of service agencies that work for the state and county child welfare agencies across the country. Better outcomes for children will happen if there is more accountability. There also needs to be due process, and poverty does not equal neglect in and of itself. Families need economic justice.
So I would say it's directly related to Tony's quote this morning. So first I want to say thank you, Shriver, for allowing for putting this panel together and having me be one of your panelists. But Tony's quote resonated with me this morning because 10% of the problem is what happens. The other 90% is how we handle it. It's not about them. It's about us. So today I'm here to educate for change, motivate people to change, to be involved. If you're doing something already, do more. This is about us. It is not about them. What can we do to change the process that they have put in place to destroy us? Because we cannot wait for the slave master to give us the key to set ourselves free.
That's right, Joyce.
Right, all right. So I'm going to just echo a little bit of some of the things that they both have said. And my belief right now is the current system is a pseudo children and family service agency that intends to treat children and family as a family that cares. However, the reality is that it's more like a system that treats certain races and class as stepchildren who have very limited privileges. So for instance, we know some of the stats that was put out there. So Blacks in Illinois make up 14.6% of the population in Illinois. However, Blacks have the highest percent of poverty rate in Illinois at 24%, Hispanics 15%, white at 8%. So what this brings me to this, in 2019, there was 82,500 cases brought to DCFS. And this includes death by abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, all of the cases. And so of all of those cases, 21,047 of those cases were indicated, which are guilty. So that's 25% of all of those cases. So that's 61,465 individuals who were accused are left picking up the pieces and dealing with the increased trauma that their children had to face, their families had to face, and so forth. And of all of those cases, it was about 513 cases that of death related to abuse or neglect. And of those, a little over 100, which even one is bad, but a little over 100 were indicated. And that leaves that 400 of those people were innocent. And I want to add that just because you were indicated, it doesn't account for those that appealed and actually were overturned in that case. So we have 18,600 foster youth in foster care. And as you notice that the Black population is 3 times that much of white population and 4 times the Hispanic. And according to Casey Foundation, they reported that 30% of youth in care graduate from high school and only 2.5 graduate from a 4-year university. That leaves us 30 to 50% leave without finishing high school or getting a high school diploma. So the statistics show that foster youth are 4 more times likely to become teen parents. This brings me to my last point in closing, is that it's so many of you might not know that while kids are in foster care, many do get abused. They're suffering trauma. There's a lot of kids that grow up in the foster care system that are not prepared to emancipate at 18 or 21. They say that the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old, yet our system is kicking them out literally at 18 or 21. They cut off medical card. They cut off all resources. The social workers and everybody cannot talk to these kids. They can't offer anything. So with the lack of education, lack of employment training, lack of preparation and readiness, now we see a large population of youth that that are homeless, et cetera, et cetera. And so now we wonder why the Illinois population, prison population has 54% Black, 31% white, 17% Hispanic. And we wonder if the foster system is leading to a pipeline to prison and then back into those parents having, single parents end up having children that then go back into foster care only because they're poor, not necessarily that they're neglectful or abuseful. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to point out about the foster system, is that we have to look at that as an option as well, how it's a pipeline to the prison system.
Right. Okay, those are all some remarkable responses. What is a vision? What do you see like far as the future? What are some of the things that we need to do to get there for change?
I see organizing around the issues. I see community leadership
Mhm.
beginning with people who have been impacted by all sorts of systems, not just child welfare. But of course, today we're talking about child welfare, but it's very hard for me to speak about child welfare when I look at the intersections between housing, mass incarceration, medical care or lack thereof, education, how we're pipelined from school to either prison or foster care through the mandated reporters that are calling and over surveillancing. The thing about people of color or Black people is no matter what environment we are in, we are being surveillanced. And we are being surveillanced in a way that catapults us into a system. Systems are tools of mass destruction for people who enter. And it has been designed for a certain class of people to enter these systems. So for me, I think everyone that's here is here today listening to the panelists because we said this panel was about not what has happened historically, but what we're going to do for change. And for me, I'm going to organize. I'm going to go to colleges. I'm going to speak to social workers who will be our next generation of social workers. I'm going to invite attorneys who will be our next generation of attorneys to join the coalition that I've built, Parent Legislative Action Network. I'm going to take action steps to not just educate my community, visiting community boards, speaking to my elected officials, but I'm also going to speak to my neighbors because they've been impacted by the same things that I've been impacted by. When I heard Trayvon Martin's parents speak, I was so moved. The first conversation, the first thing I ever heard his dad say was, I've entered a club that I didn't ask to enter. But what has happened to my son has transformed my life into a way that I will fight until I die for change. And that is what child welfare did for me when they came to my family looking to slay my relationship, my ability to have a relationship, and my ability to move forward. Everything that they put in place for me was a setup for failure. Even though I avoided their roadblocks and jumped over their hurdles, the fact is I need to reach back and get my sisters and brothers who are fighting through this right now. And the best way to do that is to tell them that they have a voice, help them to understand how the system has been designed to do what it does, and to work together to figure out a plan of how we use our 90%, as Tony readily pointed out this morning, to be the change that we want to see. It's not for you to call me and say, hey, Joyce, you should do this, because I get a lot of those calls and those emails. I say, hey, you should join me in doing it.
That's right.
And that's what I'm asking everybody today. Join me in creating change.
That's right, Joyce. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just say that one of the things is I think it's important to look at that before we can actually change a system, we have to look for who actually controls the system. So I would say that we need to follow the money, because the money will actually show you who actually controls the system. So it's not necessarily the director, you know, no pun against the director, but the director is appointed by the governor. And every time we get a new governor, they appoint a new director. In the last probably 6 years, we've had 5 new directors in DCFS. So what I say is follow the money. You'll find out who actually leads and runs DCFS. And if we can convince those folks to allow to a release of this political, hand that's on the system, then another piece is that it's interesting that we have thousands of youth in care, but we've not really focused on identifying a successful youth, a former youth in care, to become the director of DCFS. So we always have outside folks that usually is, have no, not cut from the same cloth, so to speak. Yeah, they might have a social work background, but imagine a system that's all foster youth, adopted or foster care, and nobody is ever qualified that has ever been in foster care. Nobody's qualified to be the director, to understand how to serve that, and to be able to come in and focus on equity and care and resources and services, because they will be cut from that same cloth and will understand what it's like to be in the system, and then also to successfully grow out of that system. So.
I'll just go back to what I stated earlier, and that is accountability. Agencies need to be held accountable by parents. Legislators need to be held accountable by parents. The accountability factor is huge, in that if there are no repercussions, if there are no ramifications of being unjust to families, then the status quo will continue. I also want to add that parents need to be at the table. Parents need to run POS agencies and state child welfare agencies, and there are parents who are qualified. I'm one of them.
That's right. Okay, we're going to the next question. This particular question is particularly for Suzanne and Joyce. How does or should the advocacy related to this system fit into the broader movements for racial justice?
Joyce, I'll let you go first.
I think it should fit in by, first of all, meeting people where they are, because I know this is not the popular answer, but it's the one that I believe. First of all, we should not be policing whether or not people use, especially in my community, because we know many people use outside our communities and they don't meet the same fate as we do. So the first thing is, how do we look at harm reduction as a tool? Because I'm using a substance, an illicit substance, it does not mean that I have put my children in danger. My children could have been visiting with a relative, with a grandparent, with a godparent, at a sleepover. So you come and check my urine, and then everything about me is judged by what I left in that cup. That is the most ridiculous thing that happens, one of the most ridiculous things that happens in child welfare, because you cannot judge who I am just by what I put in a cup. It doesn't speak to my parenting style. It doesn't speak to my kids' health. It doesn't speak to our relationship. That's just a segue that you use to pry open the door and to begin to destroy families. And I can say that firsthand because I was separated from my children for using an illicit substance. And people always ask what the substance is, and I'm saying it doesn't matter, because they didn't do what they were responsible to do, which was work to keep me and my family intact, and to ensure that my use did not impact my children. What they did was they snatched my children from me. They kept them from me for 2.5 years. I got a visit once a week for 2 hours. My youngest child was a newborn. There's no way to maintain a bond with a child seeing them once a week for 2 hours. And if you do the math, that equates to only 4 days out of the year. And 4 days out of the year, then there's late visits, there's canceled visits, there's all types of things. So by the end of the year, I've seen my kids 2 whole days. How does that speak to protecting a child? The only thing that I see CPS across the 50 states do is protect children from success. I don't see them protect them from anything else. And if CPS was such a great thing, I can assure you, Black people wouldn't be in at the disproportionate numbers we are in. We would only get into affirmative action.
I felt that, Joyce. Come through.
And I'm sorry I'm hyped up, but when I talk about this stuff, I just get pissed.
Let it out.
I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood your question. Can you repeat it?
Okay, how does or should the advocacy related to this system fit into the broader movements for racial justice?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you. Recognizing the parallels and the systemic barriers that exist in not only child welfare, but in the things, in the aspects of the system where race is heavily impacted, criminal justice, healthcare, and housing. We have to address all of them at the same time in order to have justice across the board. Also, racial equity includes the elimination of disproportionality in the system. Tanya, at the beginning of this webinar, gave startling statistics nationally and especially here in Cook County. And there's no way that we can move towards racial equity without addressing those startling disproportionality numbers. There needs to be changes in state and federal legislation across the nation, and parents need to have seats at the table and not just token seats.
That was wonderful, Suzanne. I agree. This third question would be for Tony. Tony, you have multiple experiences with DCFS as a child, an advocate, a parent. What do these many different experiences with DCFS mean to you and with the work that you do and you advocate for today for the system?
Yeah, no problem. And I'll explain a little bit just so people can get an understanding. So I actually am the oldest of 5. My mom was a single parent with 5 children by the time she was age 22. And the men that procreated with her decided to leave her. So therefore, she was a single parent, had to look after us children. So of course, we were on welfare growing up. And when I was around between 12 and 13 years old, my mom actually was selling drugs, and she sold to an undercover cop because she was trying to put food on the table and take care of us. As a waitress, she made little to no money, and we just didn't have enough to eat. I'm not advocating selling drugs, but that's what she did. And so it caused us, at the age of 13, and my other brothers were younger than me, we went into foster care, and we were all split up. Now, one of the fortunate things was I was blessed to have some positive folks in my life that encouraged me to go on to college, with nobody in my family at the time had gone to college. I did get through a resource through my worker, Miss Sheila Green, who still works at DCFS. She reached out and told me about a DCFS scholarship. And out of 365 youth, I was one of the 45 recipients to get a scholarship, full ride to U of I. So that was my ticket sort of out. And then when I graduated, I wanted to give back. I wanted to find a way to give back because I was appreciative of that opportunity. And so therefore I started, co-founded an organization with 2 other former foster youth, successful youth. And we served the 15,000 youth in care during those years. And what we did is we were life coaches to youth in care, and we extended that services up to the age of 25. So we worked with them from 14 to 25, recognizing that they're going to need that. And we provided tons of service for them. And while I was there, I was a keynote speaker. I led the statewide DCFS Youth Advisory Board. I was a part of the team that helped pass the Siblings Rights Act, where siblings are allowed to see each other and their siblings and so forth. I did so much stuff, so many connections with the youth that were in care, built so many relationships with the workers and so forth. And then one day, a freak accident happened with my daughter. I wasn't even present in the room. But anyway, she ended up with a severe brain injury that led me to give her CPR in order to keep her alive. When we got to the hospital, they did emergency surgery on her. And the pediatrician at the hospital said, no matter, like, this was abuse. My child almost died while in the hospital. She was put in a coma. And so then me and my spouse, we were arrested, and we were sent to jail, and we were accused of abuse and neglect. And it took me 3 years to fight DCFS in order to win that case and to get my child back out of foster care. And me growing up in the foster care system, that was something I did not want happen to my child, but it did. And then it took an extra year for me to appeal DCFS system in order to get my name cleared. And then I had to go and expunge my record. And I had dedicated my life to serving youth, to giving back. And I was accused by this system of hurting my child. And when it was all said and done, it was no, hey, we're sorry, we did, nothing like that, right? Nothing was done. And so still, because of my faith and because of my forgiving heart, believe it or not, again, the system, we can't blame like a particular director or anybody, it's the system. So I actually, my 5th year of being away from the DCFS, I was the keynote speaker again. And I talked about this story. I was a keynote speaker in 2018 and 2019. back talking to those youth, back addressing how to overcome these obstacles, accused by the same, speaking to youth that by the same system that accused me. So since then, I've co-founded and started an organization, Family Justice Resource Center. Here, this organization, we focus on medical mimics of abuse. There's tons of children that have like rare blood disease or different things that look like signs of abuse. And these families are ripped apart by DCFS without looking into those particular cases. So we have that organization. I'm also a co-founder of International Parent Advocacy Network, where we're putting together, so international parent advocacy, we're putting together a parent advocacy training and a toolkit. And we'll give you information where you can check that out. And then I also started Lawlor Consulting Group, which is an organization that helps people start nonprofits, help them start businesses. We supply resources, fundraising, grant writing, everything that we can to help organizations help other people, to transform lives and communities, to make sure that we're reducing the number of crimes in communities by increasing the number of youth organizations or youth serving organizations in the Chicago area. And again, I do all of this, and I still, to this day, I still mentor those youth that I served in the organization that I had started. That organization ended up closing down about a year after I was accused of abuse. And so I still serve those youth to this day, working with them in several different states. So again, this is how I have used what happened to me, how I fueled that fire and showed my resilience that this system can't break me, because my life is designed. I have a purpose in this world, and I'm going to continue to move forward until we can help change this system and continue to transform lives and communities. So
that was remarkable. That's so inspiring. You hit every dynamic I could think about for the audience or for anyone else that's listening. That's so inspiring. I admire you so much, especially being a Black man here on the panel, representing Tony.
Thanks.
Okay, this question is for Suzanne. What does it tell you about the system that is terminating your parental rights only for your children to make their way back to you after turning 18?
It tells me a lot about the system, but it also, my children coming back to me on their own volition when they each turned 18 years of age, tells me more about the spiritual connection and the physical connection developed while they were in my womb. My son was taken from me, from my arms on the hospital table when I gave birth to him. My urine had been tested while I was in labor for 2 days leading to his birth. My urine had been tested without my knowledge or consent for drugs. And social workers from DCFS had been called before my son was even born to meet him at the hospital upon birth and take him from the hospital and take him from my custody. My daughter was removed from my custody when she was a small child, but a toddler, for allegations that of inadequate supervision, that I left her with people without getting their approval for me to leave her with them. And they were both removed from me wrongfully, and my parental rights were terminated wrongfully because I was 2 years sober at the time of the parental rights termination. Yet all of those years that I was away from my children, they still came back. That lends importance to the spiritual bond that was developed and the physical bond that is developed when a child is in a mother's womb. It also is very disturbing that we are still talking about this. My parental rights were terminated November 10th, 1999. And on September 30th, 2020, we're still seeing wrongful terminations of parental rights. We're still seeing wrongful separations of families. We're still seeing drug usage being criminalized instead of seen as a health crisis. We're still seeing not enough supports being put in place in order for families to remain together. I want to touch on the fact that it's not only changes in leadership and directors of state child welfare agencies across the country, it is the changes in senior leadership. I'll give an example. Here in Illinois, last year, there were some legislative hearings and legislative committee meetings regarding child welfare, specifically stemming from the death of little AJ Frond. And Acting Director Mark Smith was appointed by Governor Pritzker early last year. And I watched those I watched those committee meetings on video while they were happening live. And Acting Director Mark Smith said out of his mouth, if only the contracts were better, that there are contracts that DCF has with POS agencies, and if those contracts had been written better, we could have more accountability in the POS agencies. I'm paraphrasing, of course, this is not word for word, but he said if only the contracts were better, and other senior staff at DCFS said, if only the technology was better, if only the caseworkers had iPads and the investigators could communicate real time with the office, if only there were better training for investigators and caseworkers, if only we hire more of them. Governor Warner gutted the budget and we just don't have enough money. If only there was this, if only there was that. And that was in April of last year. And we're in September of this year. Kids are still dying. Families are still being separated wrongfully. We still have an uptick in the disproportionality, Black children in the system. We still have an uptick of families being separated. That is troublesome. Yet Acting Director Mark Smith is still there, but I noticed on the DCFS senior leadership org chart, it's about 75 to 80% different people on the org chart that was there than was there just a few months ago. So you just keep switching, playing three-card Molly with our lives. You're playing three-card Molly with my life. Even though my parental rights are terminated and my children have come back to me on their own volition, I still stand in the gap and intend to continue standing in the gap for the thousands of Illinois families and America's families who are still suffering from wrongful termination of parental rights and wrongful separations. So what it tells me about my children coming back to me when they turned 18, it tells me that this system is messed up. It needs to be totally dismantled and rebuilt by parents.
That's right. That's so inspiring too, Suzanne. There's a lot of parents out here that's going through exactly that. And I hope everyone's taking heed of that and look at your strength and where you're at today. You're a remarkable woman, remarkable. And so you're so strong. I'm so thankful to even be in your presence. Okay. This next question is for Joyce and Suzanne. What systematic changes are needed regarding how the system views and treats parents who use substances or alcohol?
I don't think it's about, say that one more time.
What systematic changes are needed regarding how the system views and treats parents who use substances or alcohol? How they view anyone who uses anything that's illegal in their eyes?
that word view is making me jump up every time I hear that word view, right? Like I start going, because I really don't think it's about how they view things. I don't care how they view things, right? We're in a situation we're in because of how they view things.
Right.
I'm not even going to address how they view things. I'm going to again address what we are responsible to do when we talk about 10% versus 90%.
Right.
So what I've done is I was blessed enough to get a fellowship with Law for Black Lives. And that fellowship is wrapping up now. And I was in that fellowship when George Floyd lost his life. And one of the things that we worked on during my time in that fellowship was divest in systems and invest in communities. And so when I think about that stuff, I think about not needing to be at a table with them, sharing my views and trying to coerce them to change, because again, they are not gonna give us the key to set ourselves free, right? It's going to be an uprising, right? And now people may view an uprising very differently, but the uprising, however you view it, at the end of the day is people coming together with the same vision, seeking the same change. And that's going to be the people who have been impacted, not the people who run non-for-profits and make money off of poverty pimping our stories, right? Or for our pain, they're getting more grants. It's going to come from us being on the ground. So what I did is, prior to that fellowship, I started planning to make legislative change. But since that fellowship, I've amped up the changes that I'm gonna make legislatively, because my idea now is to shrink the system into abolishment. Right. Now we can be building something simultaneously, but I'm focused on the 85% of children who are in the system for reasons that they should not be. That is the mass. But the system's view is to focus on the 15% that, yes, the family may need a little extra support or maybe be separated. But I don't believe in terminating a parent's rights. You can't terminate DNA. You can't terminate the spiritual connection. So for me, I passed the state central registry. Here in New York, if you interacted with CPS, not only if you went to court, just an interaction could land you on the state central registry. New York Times reported that on average, about 50,000 people in New York went on the state central registry per year. More than half of that 50,000 never saw a day in court. Just a case manager who's not even a social worker, who has no real training. She could have a degree in cookie cutting, but she took their training from their view and made judgments when she entered my home. So again, I'm not interested in their view. So when I started the coalition to make this change to the state central registry, many people told me I couldn't. And people also suggested that I get a seat at a table. I don't want to sit at their table. They serve poison at their table. I don't need them. I need the people who've been impacted like me to raise our voice and speak to those who have the power legislatively to make the change based on how we have educated them. And that's what happened in that case. So while we used to stay on the registry until our youngest child turned the age of 28, and by default, if we had another child and CPS here was made aware of it, the time on the registry started over again. So I changed it so it's 8 flat years. I wanted it to be gone altogether, but I did get the 8 flat. And I never sat at the table. I never ate their poison. I never listened to their view. I never allowed their implicit biases to poison my thoughts of whether or not I could achieve what I had set out to achieve. In addition, we changed 3 other components to the bill. You can Google that. I'm not going to take up all the time here, but it was monumental changes that was made, and it would affect millions of people because this bill is retroactive. But in addition to that, I'm looking to change no more anonymous reporting, confidential reporting, bring in transparency. That's going to make less people end up in the system. I understand there are people already in the system that need support, but that's not my job. We all have a role. My job is to figure out how to shrink the system and get rid of the system. So changing from anonymous calling to confidential means that when a call is placed upon me, at least my support team, my attorney, my social worker, whomever I'm professionally working with to defend my case would be able to cross-examine that person, have a conversation with that person to verify and clarify what it is that they said when they made that call. Because I remember when I went through my case, ACS kept adding to what the caller had said. Like, you didn't lay it all out the first time, but every time it was convenient to say, oh, this didn't come from us, the caller also said, get out of here. We need somebody to clarify what the caller said. It shouldn't be left up to CPS to be the only one receiving the call, the only one talking to the caller, the only one investigating, the ownership of the foster care agencies, the ownership of everything. It's a no-win situation. I'm here to break it up, tear it up, and change it. And I'm going to do that through legislation. And I have more legislation that I'll speak about later on today. But one of the first things is to bring transparency so everyone knows what it is they're dealing with. And trust me, you don't have to sit at the table with them.
That's right. Preach, sister. Anybody else have anything else they want to say?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I thought it was about substance abuse.
Yes. What systematic changes are needed regarding how the system views and treats parents who use substance or alcohol?
Okay. Substance use disorder is a health issue, and it requires medical intervention and not criminal intervention. And child welfare intervention is akin to criminal intervention. There needs to be advanced advocacy to address this medical health crisis. Fair and just guidelines, because there is a need to dismantle the system, but we have to deal with what we have today. How do we address it today? And today, there needs to be accountability and fair and just guidelines to which people are held accountable for not following. There needs to be a think outside the box approach to substance use disorder. And the approach to it has to be less about focusing on how the parents got themselves into the situation and more about the systemic injustice that have caused the parents to go that route.
That's a good point. Anyone else has anything to add before I move on? Okay. So, is there anything that anyone would like to share and to add to give the audience something to look forward to?
I would just like to add, people can contact me whether they live in New York or not, because I'm building bridges across state lines. I'm building bridges across water. I just need people who have experienced what I've experienced. I mean, I'll work with any and everyone, but I do need people who have not been impacted to know their place, to step back. And more importantly, I want to educate, like Tony spoke about. I think educating, for me, advocates, is educating them how not to be taken advantage of by the non-for-profit industrial complexes that choose to string us up the same way the system does in many cases. I don't think I can talk about systemic change without talking about these abuses that happen to parents who are working to make change. And I think that parents have to be educated about that as well so that they don't fall into those traps. A lot of times advocates are not being paid their worth. A lot of times advocate stories are being processed just to make people's mouth open wide, like, oh, you're doing such a good job helping them, that poor person. Listen, I'm not that for you. What I am is a change maker. And guess what? Stop telling me I'm resilient because you know they abuse me and you're trying to abuse me too. I'm not resilient to that. What I am is I have strength for change. There's a purpose for my life. Everything that I went through, I will not allow to have been in vain. I will talk about not just what's happening in child welfare, but I will call out all injustices I see. Because my favorite quote is from Martin Luther King. Any threat of injustice against anyone is a threat of injustice against everyone. That's my favorite quote, because too often we stay quiet when we see the injustices. When a white person sees another person being incorrect, that's their friend. That's this, that's that. There's a gazillion reasons why they don't step up, but that's the reason why we're in this situation that we are in today, because across the board, people have seen wrong, but allowed wrong, didn't step up to make changes to the wrong. They call themselves advocates sometimes, but they see wrong happening over here, and they go, I'm an advocate for child welfare. I'm an advocate for mass incarceration. I'm an advocate against all wrong. And so that's how I live my life. I talk about it all, because change is not in a bottle. It's not in a tunnel, right? It's not in a cylinder. Change is broad. It has to happen across the board because it all intersects, even in how non-for-profits interact with us. It all intersects. And this is why I'm doing Plan, because I want to be a real leader. There's a lot of agencies out there that call themselves parent-led, but they're not parent-led. They're not parent-led. They're not authentically parent-led. And so that annoys the hell out of me. And I just have to speak about it today when we're talking about change, because that's part of the change that needs to happen. We're never going to reach the change that we're supposed to reach if we're sitting at an organization talking about as parent-led, while there's someone who's never been impacted, who don't understand, but looking to benefit off of our stories. Their focus is, but we can do little things. We've been doing little things for a long time, and where has it gotten us? When I look at this system, I see like a highway roadmap and just how it all crisscrosses and intersects. You cannot untangle that. If I put a big, thick, heavy 5-pound gold chain in the drawer, I could pull it out a year from now and it's not gonna be tangled. This little chain I have on my neck, if I put it in the drawer and leave it for 3 months, there's a chance that I may never be able to untangle it. And that's what we're working with when we work with this system. And so for me, it's not about trying to untangle little pieces, it's about tearing it down. And we need to be focused on what we are putting in place. I'm asking for a shift from people who are not about abolishing. They don't want to swing the sledgehammer. Start building what we're going to have in the community in place of that. But these little changes is never going to get us where we want to be. It's a conditioning for us to believe that little changes here and there, when they've put all types of safety mechanisms in place to ensure that a little change doesn't amount to change for my community. If you want to feel successful as an individual to say, hey, I did this and it's a small change, but there's no impact on our community, that's self-serving. I want to see things that's really going to impact our community. That's what I want to see people focus on, but mostly people who've been impacted.
Anyone else have anything to add?
Yes, I have been involved with child welfare reform advocacy for over a decade now, 15 years to that. And the biggest thing that stands out to me with regard to the advocacy community is how not only state child welfare agencies pit parents against one another, but how these so-called advocates pit parents against one another. There are people in the advocacy community who seek to profit financially off the parents and off of our stories. And that's why I sought 5 years ago today. Actually, today is the 5th year anniversary of the incorporation of Families Organizing for Child Welfare Justice. And I started that organization that is parent-led, because it's led by me, in order to be independent from so-called child savers and so-called child welfare reformists who seek to pit parents against one another. And I choose to walk with parents, and instead of walking with people who want to profit off me.
Susan, thank you. I love you. I just need to shop my panelists.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Represent, Suzanne, represent.
All right. So I will just say that one of the things I want people to walk away kind of thinking about is understand this. For years, we talk about systems, and folks have probably talked about changing the system for years. But we've seen over the time, we've seen like little bit of things happening here and there. So this kind of, again, leads to what I said before, that people don't want you to play with their money. So whoever is in charge of DCFS, it's likely that it's going to be hard to actually change. We're probably talking to a wall when I mean, I think we might make some little efforts, but it's little efforts because whoever is controlling the money do not want you to mess with their money. So once you start messing with the way that the foster care system is the pipeline to the prison system, if you look at all of that stuff, there's definitely a connection. There's money made in that. And once you start messing with money, you got problems. Another thing then is that right now we see there's a lot, if you look at it, there's a lot of waste of tax dollars, because again, I gave you statistics showing 25% of the cases that come in are indicated and 75% is not. And so think about the tax dollars that are wasted every single time that we go through this system. And here, in many of those cases, they come in because of allocations of neglect. And we just talked about how many of the parents that are in the system or Black families, and we know a disproportionate amount of Black children are in the system. So now we're looking at, is it really neglect or is it poverty? And one of the things that we could think about is offering parents, instead of taking the children from them, saying that they're not fit parents and not able to take care of them, what if the system offered more vouchers to help? So you don't have to bring the parents into foster care, but allow them more vouchers for bed, vouchers for clothes, vouchers for books and school supplies and things like that, to give that parent a little bit of assistance. And if the parent is dealing with some substance abuse, because they're dealing with a lot of trauma in the Black and Hispanic communities. So what if, instead of bringing them into the system and taking their kids, that you offer some supportive services for 60, 90 days or whatever to get them some help if they are dealing with some substance abuse, right? Instead of just labeling them, right? And as pretty much done and then terminating their rights. Another thing is to keep in mind that DCFS have plenty of contracts with hospitals and other agencies. So when you go to the doctor and you're just doing your routine checks, I mean, you know, any little thing, the pediatricians have contracts with DCFS. So you're going to see a lot of cases come in from there. I mean, even when my daughter slips and falls and hurts her knee or bump her head, because of the traumatic experience that I had to face, I'm always, you know, thinking about that. Every time she goes to the doctor, is a pediatrician going to look at me, look at my skin color and say, yeah, I think this child has been abused. She has one too many scars on her knees, not understanding that, you know, she has some developmental issues. Maybe there's some, you know, other things that's going on there. And then finally, looking at majority of the services that DCFS have are subcontracted out. And to Suzanne's point, really, where's the accountability? So if all these subcontracted agencies are really serving majority of the youth in care, who's really monitoring them and who's looking over them to make sure that they're really helping the youth, you know, transition through and are prepared? And so I'll just end in this is, again, I came into the system, I grew up, you know, poor and everything. And the statistics say, hey, we're pretty much, if you're in foster care, they're already really negative statistics of saying, you know, how successful you'll be. And I'm not saying that every single youth in care is not going to make it, but a small percentage do make it. And here's the difference, that we need continuing support, continuing resources, not only at 21 or even 25. I'm still mentoring youth across 5 different states that are now in their 30s, 29, 30, and I'm still providing help, job resources, money, trying to help with things like birth certificates and stuff like that, so one of the young men can get a job. I mean, there's so many things that goes on that we have, the continuing trauma, the feeling of abandonment, all of these things, and trying to, make it in this world. And a lot of people will just really have us counted down and out, and they kind of leave us, to the side, like, oh, those are foster kids. But you know what? There's tons of foster kids that are famous, that have done so many things. So again, my resilience didn't come from the foster system. Yes, I took advantage and got the scholarship and graduated, and I used that to my advantage, because a lot of the kids in care want to get out. They don't understand how to use that system in order to succeed and to make it out and to do things. And so once I recognized that, and I attribute it to my faith in God has carried me through, and it allowed me to continue to push through, to say, I don't care what comes in my way. I don't care who comes in my way. I don't care what happens. I'm still going to make it. I'm still going to push through. I'm still going to serve those youth that are in care, whether we get Joyce's thing to get it, the DCFS to get shut down or not. I am still looking to serve and to meet and to help and to train and to do whatever I can for all those youth in care. And that's why me and a few of them, a select few, we're working on a book, which hopefully will be out if we can get some resources to finish it. But it's Life After Foster Care. And we're going to be giving that book back to those youth that are in care and talking about our stories and encouraging those that are in care that don't see the successful people like myself or Antoine, Michael, and some of the other, April, Curtis, all these other folks, Jeremy and so forth, that are successful former youth in care, James, Swami, all of these folks that are successful youth in care that can go back and to help, rebuild this system. So that's kind of what I want people to think about, that there is still hope.
Right. Thank you so much, Tony. That was really strong.
Thompson, before we move forward, I just want to say that I don't believe in surveillance. I don't want help from them. When they helped the Indians, they gave them blankets with smallpox on it. I don't want their help. Everything doesn't need to come from them. They are not the saviors. They are not God. They are not Buddha. They are not Allah, whoever it is that we choose to call them if we're not atheists. They are not that. Why do they have to have their hands in everything? I don't want their services. I don't want anything from them. I want what we used to have, community and family. And we would have that if they stopped breaking it up. ASFA is the death sentence for families. When we talk about child welfare, it annoys me so bad because we keep talking about it as if they don't understand what they're doing, as if there is no intention behind it. People like to tread on the line carefully and say, they might have had great intention. They ain't have no damn intention to do anything. And I'll tell you why. Because kids are strip searched just like prisoners. They're both separated from everything and everyone they know and love. They both change their locations using garbage bags or pillowcases. They both have set visit times on set visit days. They both eat what they are served. They are both paroled back either to the community or to their parents. They both have oversight during that parole period. You're gonna try to convince me that that system was designed to look just like the prison system by accident? That was an accident? No, it wasn't an accident. They did it because they know that they don't, as Tony spoke about earlier, prepare children to succeed on their own after they are ejected from this system, which we like to call emancipation because it sounds much nicer. After they're ejected from this system, they are more likely to end up in prison. How would they not? They're more likely to be utilizing a substance. They're more likely to be selling their bodies or drugs to try to eat day to day because their economic life has been thrown underground. because they have not been given the skill set or the education to go out and get a job that will sustain them and or their children if they have one. Making it more likely that their children would go into foster care as they've been in the past. Recidivism, it's all built in. But not only that, foster care is the prerequisite, and that's why they are preparing them to say, don't be alarmed when you're an adult, when we strip search you, when we take your clothes off, because this has been happening to you your entire life in foster care. It is a prerequisite. We need to look at it. You cannot tell me that I dropped out of school in the 8th grade and you got people who've come together with PhDs who don't know the trauma that's caused through the separation of families. You cannot convince me that it's not intentional. When our 5 senses are over alarmed every time they hit a new environment. A child hits a new environment that they're probably going to stay at for a maximum of 3 to 4 months, and each time their senses are heightened to the point where it's probably out of control. The smell in the home is different. They're using different things to clean the home, the seasonings that they cook with, the taste of the food, even if both homes cook chicken, one's baking it, one's frying it, the background noise, the music, the television, the tone of the voice, the sheets they sleep on, the material that the couch is made of, all of their senses are touched and heightened. And then as soon as they get accustomed to that, in addition to the different rules at each location, we go ahead and switch them to a new home. And when we switch them, we change their schools, we change their doctor, we change their friends, we change their authority figures, and we still acting as if this wasn't done with intention. I have a problem with that.
I felt that. We're gonna move right on into Q&A. So this is for anyone who's willing to answer. From Justina, how do we work with family court to include sanctioned CPS for perjury?
Treat them like you would one of us if I perjured myself to protect my sister, brother, mother, or friend. Treat them the exact same way. Because if it doesn't work for you and it's not good for you, then you shouldn't be doing it to select people. And the fact that they select who they do it to, again, shows intentionality.
I was gonna say, I think Suzanne and both Joyce mentioned it too, but like, one of the things is we you know, in the foster care system, or whether it's a hotline call or anything, it is directly from the community directly to the foster care system. And one of the things that we're trying to advocate with IPAN, that I'm working with, International Parent Advocacy Network, we would like to have parents at the table. So, I mean, if you're getting hotline calls, or you're getting somebody that's going to go to the house to check on families, you know, to look up, like we're saying that a parent advocate, right? We're talking about trained parent advocate, to be alongside with police officers or social workers or whatever, because again, they're in the system, so they're already biased, right? I mean, they're already biased. But if we have a parent advocate that can literally go with them and say, you know, this is a situation of poverty, I understand it because, you know, whatever their interaction is, I think it would just help. I'm not saying that one thing is perfect, but it will help if we have more parent advocates at court, you know, going to these homes where these police and social workers are going to do wellness checks and whatnot. Because again, those systems, you know, they're gonna just pull the people out. They're just gonna grab them. They don't have anybody to advocate to let them know. Most people are not prepared for DCFS to come, and when they come, they speak all this jargon and all this stuff to get you to sign over your rights and terminate your rights, to say, you know, and all of this stuff. They need somebody there to advocate, that knows the language, that knows the system, you know, attorneys and things like that, that understand how DCFS work. Not these little, like, you know, court-appointed attorneys that have no understanding about DCFS, because all they're going to do is just pretty much just say, okay. And now, you know, you're still in the system. You're still done. So that's just my thought. That's my thought.
That's a strong fact. Okay, we're moving on. Suzanne, you would like to add, or we're ready for the next question?
The next question.
Okay. This is from Latanya. How can we hold the POS agencies accountable for falsifying documentation?
I say name names. During my presentation today on this webinar, I named the name of Acting Director Mark Smith as having said several things about what needs to happen at DCFS in order for it to be a better organization. When he was speaking to the legislative committees in Springfield last year. And here we are over a year later, and whether those things have been put in place and implemented, I'm not sure, but all I know is that kids are still dying and there's still a startling number of Black children in the system as opposed to other races. I named the names. In order to hold people accountable, you have to be brave enough to name the names and have the proof of what has happened in order and be able to articulate that in a way to get people to support you in your endeavor to hold agencies and or people accountable.
Well, I have an idea to hold people accountable, but unfortunately I can't share it right now because there's some heads of nonprofits that don't look like me that I believe would rush and do it, but there is a way. And so if you want to know and you want to contact me directly, you can do that at Advocate and Organize, because I've learned certain things I can't put out when I'm preparing to do it, but there is a way. And one of the ways is to bring transparency into the court. Right now, family courts are not a closed court, but they treat it as if they are, because I've been to courts where they've asked me and other parents who've come with me to support a parent to leave, not because we behaved a certain way or looked a certain way, simply because they didn't want anyone to witness what was happening in court that day. And so I found a way around some of their shenanigans, because in a moment, you're not going to go back and forth. You're going to say yes, and you're going to walk out the door, because if not, you're probably going to be drug out. And me being drug out and calling an attorney to bail me out is probably not the best use of my time. So I've really thought this through based on those experiences. And yes, there is a way to bring clear transparency to the court so that we can hold them accountable. So much happens in family court that is wrong. Do you think, again, that it's an accident, that it's not intentional, that if you go to criminal court, there's rows and rows of people to sit in the audience and view cases? They utilize this thing about, oh, for the safety of the child and, you know, to protect the child, to keep it small. But the fact of the matter, it's a court and it's open. So whether you feel like that or not, I'm sorry, your feelings don't matter. It's an open court. And we should have as many roles in family court as we do in criminal court, because it is an open court. But they discourage you from coming, and we just have to take it upon ourselves to start figuring out how we can get in there, see things, write it down, and take other actions. But there definitely needs to be a court watch as well. And so if you want to get some people together and send them to courts and have them running around doing that, I welcome you to start doing that as well. But there's more to come on bringing transparency to family court. And it is about transparency, and it is about intentionality, and those two are playing against one another when we talk about how child welfare works across America. There's a hidden agenda. There's a hidden way that they operate. Everything about them is in the dark, and they work hard to keep it there. They are not open. They are not honest. They don't want parents to know their rights. Another piece of legislation I'm working on is Miranda rights for families in child welfare, and I'm working on that on a state level. We already have the bill drafted, and we already have sponsors to the bill. So this is a piece of legislation that I'm really working hard to push. And that's something you can push with me if you're in New York. If you're outside New York, you can think about what that would mean to help bring support, because while parent advocacy is a cool thing, it's a thing. I'm concerned sometimes with parent advocacy because the people who push parent advocacy are people who started it 25 years ago, and parent advocacy has to progress. And the way I see parent advocacy right now in 2020, it's not progressing from back rubbing. I had a parent advocate years ago, and she rubbed my back and said, it's okay, you're gonna get through this. I got through it, just listen to what they said. Jump through the hoops, run through the fire, it'll be all right. Don't push back, don't raise your voice, don't do that. That's gonna make them be more harsh on you. That's not what I view as advocacy. And that's what a lot of white people teach as advocacy. A lot of people who are out here on the ground doing this work that have been trained to be advocates have been trained by white people who don't have a damn clue. And I'm just gonna call it what it is because that's what it is. People who've been doing this advocacy thing for 18 years, trained by the same people who take our children. That's bullshit. I'm gonna stop right there because that's a rabbit hole for me.
Okay, so I have one more question. What insights can that's from Barbara. What insights can any of the panelists offer to addressing the complex issue when systematic racism, DCFS, custody, and the cultural complexities of refugee or immigrant populations are all part of the issue of DCF custody?
I'll answer that. We need to stop separating the immigrant issue from the other families who are being separated. Family separation is family separation, whether it's immigrants or whether it's in the poverty-stricken Black communities or whether it's in the white suburbs. Wrongful family separation is wrong, period. And so in order to address the immigrant aspect of it, we all need to be in the same advocacy sphere. We all need to advocate for one another together.
Yeah, I like to second that, Suzanne. Thank you for that, because I remember when the thing first started at the border, when it became a thing, every politician from my community ran down and held an event and everybody was smiling for the camera. And, you know, a child being separated from their family is a child being separated from their family, regardless of their skin color or their cultural background, right? But somehow, my neighborhood, these same politicians from my neighborhood has one of the highest removals in New York. Harlem's numbers are only going down now, because I live in Harlem, New York, because it has been gentrified. So if you look at how the slide is going on, maybe 2014, there might have been close to 2,000 kids removed from Harlem. And then as it became gentrified, the numbers went down. So the numbers are still going down, but in comparison to other neighborhoods, the removals from Harlem is still the highest. But I guess it's more palatable to these same elected officials to have children removed from their community, just not at the border. Or maybe it was photo prop time. You understand? I don't understand their motivation, but I have a belief of what it was, which was photo op time. It was a popular, sexy topic at the time. But it should be just as sexy when it's the person around the corner from where you living at whose children were taken, who were separated, who they're visiting once a week for 2 hours, who is at higher risk of being injured, being separated from their own parent. It's everything you said, and it should not be palatable to your taste buds or tolerable to your ego when it's not a child from the border, because it's happening right here on our own soil.
That's deep. Tony, would you like to add?
They said it was me.
Okay, guys, we can move on to the announcements. It was a pleasure. I'm sure everyone is inspired.
right, so that was such a wonderfully rich discussion. I hate to cut us off, but let us be mindful of time and just get to some announcements. And also just to for folks to know, at the end, I will have a slide up in how you can follow up with all of us, the panelists, Shriver Center, and follow up offline with any questions we may not have gotten to. So now I just want to take a few minutes to make some announcements. This first one is for you, Suzanne, if you want to speak to the save the date of yours.
Hi, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, today, September 30th, 2020, is the 5th year anniversary of the incorporation of my organization, Families Organizing for Child Welfare Justice. And in celebration of our 5th year anniversary, on Tuesday, November 10th, we're hosting a virtual town hall where we intend to have our board members, a lot of people I'm known nationally and in some countries around the world for my advocacy for over a decade. But I want people to meet my board and hear their heart with regard to the issue of child welfare reform, abolishing the child welfare system and the like. In addition, I hope to have some other community leaders participate in the virtual town hall as well. And this will commemorate, this town hall meeting will not only commemorate our 5th year anniversary, but we will also be speaking to what our desires are for the new political leadership across the nation as a result of the election on Tuesday, November 3rd.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Suzanne. Nina, would you like to shout out your Westside Health Authority Community Reentry Support Center and talk a little bit about what they do?
Yes, my name is Elena Thompson, better known as Nina. I am an organizer and a volunteer and a facilitator at the Westside Health Authority. So we're located in the Austin area in Chicago, Illinois. We're at 5417 West Division, Chicago, Illinois, 60651. We can be contacted, as you can see, 773-786-02226. We are a reentry support center. We also give out community resources as far as free food, shelter resources. I am here every Thursday, every week from 1 to 4 o'clock, free hot meals, free haircuts, and follow-up appointments for any other services that you guys may be interested in. And we're open from Monday through Friday from 9 to 11:30. Please feel free to call in advance to make any other follow-up appointments. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nina. Sounds like a great resource. And then Tony, do you want to talk a little bit about how folks can connect with Family Justice Resource Center and IPAN?
Yes, absolutely. So again, if you are here and you know families right now that might be facing allegations of abuse or neglect by DCFS, my organization, Family Justice Resource Center, with our executive director, Michelle, does a wonderful, wonderful job working with not only in Illinois, but also in other states. But we're really overwhelmed with the amount of cases that we are working with. But we provide resources to help parents, to help connect you with attorneys and folks that can help you with that case. These are cases that are not actual abuse. Like if you did something, that's something different, but these are medically mimic cases of abuse that we are working to help families to overcome those. And then again, I'm a part of the International Parent Advocacy Network, which I've posted our website there. We're building that website. We're continuing to work right now on creating a parent advocacy training center, and as well as continuing to provide parent advocacy training throughout not only the US, but also in other countries as well. And so stay tuned for that. And then finally, just as a reminder, I have an organization called Lawlor Consulting Group, LLC, and I provide nonprofit and organization startups, help with grant writing, fundraising, and all those things. So if you're, in the communities and you're looking to serve youth and, youth and families and communities, especially in disproportionate economic communities, that's where my service is most utilized. And working with African-American families and minority families, Hispanic families, to help them to transform lives in their communities. So then reach out to me on Facebook or my website. And any of these organizations, we have Facebook, website, our website, all of those, LinkedIn, all of those places, you can contact me. So thank you. Great,
thanks so much, Tony. Just briefly, if you save the dates from Shriver for the continuation of what was an incredible kickoff to this series. We have 3 more webinars we're planning to continue this series. You can see we'll cover issues of mandated reporting, get deeper into the intersection between the criminal, legal, and the foster system, and then we'll close it out with the intersection of the health care system and the foster system. And I will leave this slide up there as we close out. This is how you can contact each of the panelists and the moderator. If you have questions about this webinar, you can email info@povertylaw.org. And here are the ways you can follow all of the work that's been spotlighted and highlighted today. I just want to thank so deeply all of our incredible panelists, our moderator, Suzanne, Joyce, Tony, Nina. Y'all spoke so much truth to power. You really brought it today as expected. And I am so excited that we had this space and could share space with y'all and community with y'all to talk about this critical issue. And I look forward to continuing to work with you and see how we can move this advocacy forward and follow the lead of wonderful parents like y'all. So with that, I close us out. Thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to hear from you and see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.